Fearless. Chidiogo, thank you for joining me on Fearless. You come to us with two stories, actually. That of your mother, who's supposed to have the most awards of any African, over 900, because of her fearlessness and success in tackling counterfeit drugs in 2001 and 2009. And then there's your story. You are many things, including a World Economic Forum Global Leadership Fellow, an Associate Fellow of the Nigerian Leadership Initiative, and an Atlantic Dialogue Emerging Leader, which is how I met you maybe about 3 or 4 years ago in Morocco. You also speak 7 languages. So welcome, thank you for agreeing to have this conversation on Fearless. I'd like to start with your mother's story. For people who might not have known what a force Dora Akunyili was, would you introduce her to them?
Absolutely, with pleasure. Thank you so much, Uduak, for having me and for this platform for such a great discussion. Dora Akunyili is the definition of fearless. And it's interesting I say is, even though she's late, because I believe fearlessness lives before one's own physical or sort of bodily life here on earth. And she's fearless in that she fully trusted that the moment she lived her truth and she was true to her values, that all she had to do was keep going. And she did that as the Director General of NAFDAC, safeguarding the health of the nation. And this almost cost her life, literally in more ways than one assassination attempt, because she was foiling a very lucrative business of selling fake drugs in Nigeria. And she said, no, this is just not what I value, what we value. Life is so important. We need to safeguard it. She went on to become the Minister of Information and Communication. And then within that, she remained fearless and spoke up in key moments in Nigerian history where no one was speaking up, when there was a vacuum in leadership. But who she is much more than her job. But I would say at the core, it really is this woman that was so true to self in a way that allowed her to be fearless in every way, shape, or form.
So where did your mother grow up? What were some of her formative experiences? How did she come to this knowledge of self and purpose?
It's a beautiful question, because in many ways, as you know, I've written a book about her life, and I really sat with, where do I start? Do you start with the part that people know, but actually realize that who she is was seeded so much earlier as a child in her childhood. So the book starts very much with her formative years in Makurdi, the daughter of a very successful business man working in construction, who had come from really nothing and had become a very self-made man, but lost it again during the war.
The Biafran War.
The Biafran War, correct, because her family really were really affected by this. And before that, she'd been sent to live in the village. So in many ways, she's the product of Makurdi, the village, understanding that money is not everything, because her father was rich as a child, then lost his parents, became poor, became rich as an adult, then lost everything in the war, became poor again, and then eventually passed on. So I think it's something about just seeing how what really really within that, what really matters. And being taught that by her grandmother, who she lived with in the village, being taught that by her father, who loved her. She was the apple of his eye, and really made an effort to impart a lot of his wisdom upon her. She learned that from the environment that she lived in. Back in the day, she reflected often on how the village in those days was really about community and supporting each other. And we've moved so far away from that in many ways. And that's something that's often a factor of not only her sadness, but her desire and hope for Nigeria, was that we could reconnect with some of these childhood values that she had lived, specifically in the village. She went to school in Nsukka, Queen of the Rosary Secondary School, had that Catholic background, and her story goes on, and eventually became a pharmacist because she believed so deeply in really harnessing these local plants and remedies that we have, and how do we use that to support health of people. So She didn't start overnight to be Dora Akunyili. It was a seed that was planted by those that came before her. And perhaps even more so, right? Because these values were ancient in the world that we all come from in this. And that's why the book that I wrote is titled Ubuntu, which speaks to this now in African philosophy, but has its roots in Zulu language. I am because we are. The interconnectedness that exists, the brotherhood, the sisterhood. This formed her. This was her story, and the story that I'm so happy to share.
We'll come to the title of the book later on. You're talking about your mom's values being seeded in her childhood, the experience of the war, because of course your mom, your family comes from Eastern Nigeria. You're from the Igbo community, and so it's quite interesting how you talk about the rags to riches story. And so money isn't everything. And so presumably, once your mother becomes the Director General of the National Agency for Food and Drug Control, there must be attempts to bribe her, which make no difference to her because she's already clear in her mind that money isn't everything. No, go ahead.
So true. And there's something about the Biafra War that you're very right. We as Igbos, she as an Igbo woman in her family really experienced the senselessness of the loss of life. And within that, I made a vow that, and also the exploitations that were happening even within Igbos. She was exploited. There's a story of her working in a farm where she simply wasn't paid for months, despite promise of it. So there's something about that really conviction that life above all else, right? Money most certainly is paper, comes and goes, but life doesn't. And I believe the marriage of the two really were very important to her.
So your mother's commitment to integrity brings her to the attention of the then President Olusegun Obasanjo, which is what leads to her appointment as the Director General of NAFDAC. Tell us that story.
That's a beautiful story. She was at home in Enugu and got a phone call where there's a voice on the other end, an unmistakable voice, if you know, quote unquote, Baba's voice. And it said, this is
President Obasanjo's voice.
Exactly. Thank you. Who is colloquially known by many as Baba, which literally is like, encapsulating his godfather, almost like figure. So this is the president, the voice said, and she was in shock because she was working as a pharmacist back in the university. This after the work she had done at the Petroleum Trust Fund. And the president had heard that she returned 14,000 British pounds, about 14,000 British pounds, which she had a change after she was given money by the Petroleum Trust Fund to undergo a surgery in the UK, which she found that she didn't need only upon arrival in the United Kingdom. And after being told that they could forge a receipt to account for the full spending. And she said no. So this was very much part of that story that we're already sharing on her values, and taking another's money was just never part of who she was or what she believed in, and believed fully that, well, nobody might see you and you might feel like you can get away with it. So it's okay. It's just, what you're doing. And God knows, because she's extremely religious, spiritual. So that being said, the president heard the story of the Igbo woman that returned thousands of British pounds to her parastatal when she didn't have to. And he was looking for an honest woman, an honest person to serve the position of Director General, and heard of her. And despite the various oppositions, I suppose he connected to something and to a truth that this woman was special, and reached out to her, and the rest is history.
At what point, Chidiogo, do you become aware of the fact that your mother isn't just your mother, that she's this larger than life persona?
Such an interesting question, because in many ways, hindsight, you see yourself as a child and how we're always with our mom. She had this aura around her. The moment she's at home, all six of her children are in beside her, around her bed, wanting to be around her. But you take that for granted. You believe that perhaps it's just the way it is. It's your mother. Perhaps that's how it is. And it's just over the years that you see more and more people gravitating towards her, and the same impact on so many people. Just this, because larger than life is just her ability to reach people and make people feel seen and cared for, and that field just expanded the more people got to know of her. And that was most certainly NAFDAC was the explosion, where she's on TV, she's on newspaper, so more people have access to that who is this woman moment. I want to get to know her, and I like what she's doing, and I'm inspired by that. And her field grew, and that was the moment you kind of go, whoa, what's happening. And
how old are you?
I must have been 15ish when she exploded. 15, 16, watching always from the side. And over the years, farther and farther away, but always, and maybe even more, able to understand what it is she was doing, right? But always very proud, always very proud. And, many people start calling her mommy. So at some point you're having a conversation with 10 people and you're all just like, so mommy said a mommy. And you realize that she's a mother to many more than you at that point. And in many ways that was okay, because she had that capacity.
Okay. I mean, for so many people, sometimes it's not okay. Your parents is a big deal. Random people are calling them mommy. They're eating into family time. Was that an issue for you, for your siblings, for the family?
So I've been reflecting a lot on the time I had with my mother. And in many ways, big theme is that it wasn't enough, right? Not only because she passed away at 59, far too early, but just because over the years, I left home at 9 to go to boarding school. And my boarding school was in Lagos. We grew up in the southeast in Enugu, so very far away. And
which school did you go to?
Queen College.
Okay.
So not having enough time with her is most certainly a big theme of our relationship. And her work took everything. And, while there are definitely personal, regrets in that, and at the same time, there's a trust that everything happened the way it was meant to. And in many ways, it didn't start with her work. When I was born, for example, she was sick, so I didn't have time with her. Then she went to the UK for a PhD for a year plus, and I was 3. And eventually I leave at 9. Funny, incidentally, she had left home from Makurdi to the southeast to school at 9. So I believe she also didn't have time with her parents. And in many ways, that's our own recurring story. So there's that regret. But at the same time, it didn't feel like it started with Nat. That just sort of solidified the truth that this was just a woman who was always on the go, just always pushing and wanting the best for herself and her family. So pushing us to be somewhere else or do something else. But it doesn't mean that there's not the part of me that wishes that I had more time with my mother. And in many ways, I believe that writing the book has been an exercise of doing that. Really, so many thousands of hours spent with her, albeit with her story and her spirit. It feels like this is my own journey of healing that, the time that was lost.
You talk about healing, and I'll come to that. But, let's stay with your mom for a minute, because, when you Google your mother's name, you see all these, Nigerians love their fancy titles, Iron Lady, Drug Lioness, Amazon, Fearless Warrior, And people are writing theses about your mother. She's celebrated. She's an icon in Nigeria's development. What does it feel like to be the daughter of such a woman? Is there a tension? Is there, this is a legacy I've got to live up to, being superwoman? Am I making it a superwoman? What's that experience like?
In many ways, it's not new. So I went to Queen's College, to your question. I had 3 sisters that came before me. And
so for people who don't know Nigeria, Queen's College is one of the country's prestigious schools, which I believe is still. Yeah.
It still is. As it's a government school, so that's what's really has been beautiful about it, that it's public school, but has schooled so many amazing women. It's an all-girls school in Lagos. And I have 3 sisters that went before me, and they were extraordinary. So I came in with the burden of, are you Ijoma's sister? Are you Sumter's sister? They were head girls, prefects, house captains, big roles. And known and smart. My sister got the best result in the country. It's really that group that I stepped into. So I hated it. I just wanted to be me and not compared to everyone. I remember when I got a French teacher who transferred from King's College, where my brother was, and then came to go, you Dozier's sister, and that's my brother. So I thought, oh my goodness. So interestingly enough, that has been a theme of my life. So it was very telling when my final 2 years of Queen's College became sort of more in the limelight. And it went from Ayusumto Njideka's, Ijoma's sister, to Ayudora's daughter. I thought
which is how we met, actually. Was Ayudora's daughter.
But it's at some point I contemplated that could be a title of the book, because it's a question I've heard so often. I would be in Italy somewhere and you have someone see my name, it's like Ayudora's daughter at the airport, passport, Ayudora's daughter. So I must have received a version of that question in many ways, shape, or form, and I'm proud, and I felt the burden when I was younger with my sisters, because you're still finding yourself and your identity, and so many people imposing upon me what that should be, how I should be, and what I should live up to. But in many ways, a big part of my adulthood has been being true to my own self. And as much as it has an influence on that, and maybe forces me to be a little self-conscious in how I show up sometimes, I think the fact that I hadn't been in Nigeria, I was literally always just running away. I think I was running away from that needing to be anyone else. I was living in China, in Germany, in Italy, in France, literally just running from that identity that was linked to so many people, trying to find my own truth. And in that way, just not being always in the core of it, I could be Dora's daughter from afar, but at the core, be myself.
Mm-hmm. So I remember back when I was working at the BBC, interviewing your mother after an assassination attempt. And I think the bullet missed her by a whisker. It went through her head wrap. So I interview this woman and she's unfazed. They will not kill me. They will not finish me. I will do this work. I will save Nigerians. God is my strength, all of that. But what is it like for you guys at home? She comes home and I've been attacked, see the bullet hole, through my head wrap. What are you guys thinking? What are you saying? How are you processing the experience? That your mother's trying to save Nigerian lives and there are people who are trying to kill her for it.
We were in the car, we're in a convoy in the car behind her when the shooting was happening or happened. And that was a very scary day for all of us. It was Boxers Day, right after Christmas. We had decided to go to the village impromptu because there had been some sort of warning of a pending attack. So we hadn't spent Christmas in the village, which had been our culture for so long. But there was one event that she wanted to go for. That being said, it was very, very scary. And at the same time, it was the thing that made her stronger than ever. So it was this odd juxtaposition of, you're scared for her, but she's now on the opposite spectrum of fear. It's like the worst has happened now and unstoppable. But something about my mom is that she's very good about guarding her own space, so you don't get to impose your fear on her. She kind of blocks it so her conviction almost had to be double to prevent people from projecting their fears on her, because there's just so many people were afraid. Us most certainly included. We're hearing the bullets, driving like crazy people, and you're just like, this is not okay. It's like tears, screams. There had been a victim that day, that a bystander. So it was real. It's gunshots, it's assassins. Or something that she believed in was that her life was for a purpose. And I think there's something about when we have such a deep sense of belief in what we're here for, and a listening and a connection to that. And she's very convincing. So with that, she just managed to convince us all that we had no need to worry. And that meant that we had to swallow sometimes our worry, right? Because she's a strong personality. She's telling you, to your point, like, everything is fine. How much are you going to push against that, Because in many ways, part of her magic was that she was just strong enough to convince you that the sky is pink, and you say, okay. So she believed that she would be fine and she was protected. And this does not come from nowhere. We talked about seeds earlier, and she lived a life where there had been multiple challenges, but each time she had been protected. So I believe that she had that communication with the divine, almost with God, and a belief that there was a bigger purpose for her life. And she was focused on trusting that and blocking out anything else that questioned that, and we had to toe the line. So our fears were swallowed in many ways, and then you step into a place of hoping and praying that she's okay. And that was more or less the best that you could do.
So you as her family had to swallow the fears, but her conviction also comes from personal experience. She's lost a sister to diabetes because her sister was given fake insulin. So there's this conviction that she's got to save lives and prevent, unnecessary death. She's clear in that reasoning that fake drugs are killing possibly millions of Nigerians, and so must be dealt with. But is there a point where you all are thinking, Mom, it's enough, just walk away? It's not worth it?
In some ways, no, because we trusted her. We trust her. And my mother is very convincing in her clarity. So there's something about the faith that is very infectious. Her faith, as you know her, it's just something I've never quite met before. When someone looks you in the eye and says, like, God has a plan, this is clear. And you could be scared, but you couldn't dismiss her. You couldn't dismiss the trust that we've always had in her, that she had a way of feeling things, of knowing things. And we'd seen it over the years, right? We'd known her for many years where she just has premonitions and a clarity and a sense. Going to Queen's College was her idea, and that changed everything for our family. Applying for green card lottery was her idea, and it came from nowhere, and that changed everything. She wanted one try. So she was that woman. There was something about her sense of connecting to a deep sense of intuition. I call it intuition. She calls it perhaps faith or God's voice, right? And that allowed us to trust that we could let go because she let go, or she believed so we could believe.
Mm. So peel back the layers for us, because you've told us yourself this woman is strong, she is bold, she's fearless, she has this incredible connection to God, and she believes that she's protected, she's covered. There is a plan, and so I imagine people encountering your mom, this confident African woman, and in the way that confident African women are judged, they see her as intimidating. Okay. If she wasn't afraid of bullets, okay, assassins, what was she afraid of?
She was afraid of not living up to her expectation of self. That same intuition she had that she had a bigger purpose made her always wary of not living up to it. One, she was afraid for her family. She would make statements around, the one thing that could break her was if something happens to us. And this was an experience that we had a brush with my little brother, who was intimidated when he was in secondary school in Iwinedion, by someone who had been sent to inquire if he was the son of Dora, and he had to lie more or less and say no, I deny her. It was this biblical story, and that was the first time she came face to face with, while nothing might happen to her because she was clear, her family could be targeted, and that was a big fear for her. And she had ended up sending my brother abroad. And it was something she shared often that she was afraid of. And, at some point her brother was kidnapped. So it was something about family for her that was sacred, human lives that were sacred, afraid that she could fail the millions of people that she was called to support by failing herself, failing to, so that I think that's why she worked harder than anyone that I've ever met. Everyone you interview that worked with her, the first thing they'd say is just she didn't stop. And I think that was born of a fear that she was not going to live up to that calling. And almost maybe there's a part of her that felt always out of time. And that fear in some ways manifested because she did pass at 59. And one of the greatest things that she was feeling in that time was this fear of death, knowing that she wasn't done. So I think that was the culmination, and not done. And one is with the work, one is with the family, and the two are just sort of meeting and causing her a lot of pain on top of the pain that she was feeling physically.
Because of course she died from cancer.
Correct.
This book that you've written, I Am Because We Are, An African Mother's Fight for the Soul of the Nation. It's the first book you've written. You are one of 6 children. What made this your assignment?
Such a beautiful question. And in many ways, the book chose me. I was in my apartment, I was living in Geneva, and I had a voice of premonition, intuition, just whisper this idea that came from nowhere to write my story, write your mother's story. And I remember writing my siblings in our WhatsApp, oh wow, I'm gonna write our mom's story. And just like that, it just made perfect sense from 0 to why is that something that we hadn't or are not with. I've always written. I love writing, and I trust deeply in my intuition, and that this came as it did, and I got the support of my siblings, my father, meant a lot. And the last years were really me just allowing the story to come through. And I trust that there are other ways that this will inspire different things. But for now, this I have allowed it to flow, and I trust that the future can allow for different versions of the story to be told, because stories never have to end and could always inspire and be retold from different perspectives, different messages. This is me. It's just simply saying yes to the calling that I received and trusting that it will birth so much more.
Could you read an excerpt for us? I think you've got something prepared.
Absolutely. I wondered about my mother's pain, that which she carried and that which she buried. The ache of leaving home at such an early age, of living through a devastating civil war followed by the loss of those she loved the most. And this all happened to a girl still in her teenage years. And just when life seemed to offer her a break, a different pain awaited her. By then, she had learned to transform her disappointment into unshakable strength, which served her in battle against forces contributing to senseless human suffering across her beloved homeland, Nigeria. What happens to pain over time when it's consigned to silence? As I wrote my mother's story, as if in her voice, weaving its complex textures into a narrative, I found that her strength was far more apparent than her pain. On the journey of piecing together her truth, I discovered that strength and pain are mirrors of one another. For strength grows to protect from pain, and pain builds strength. My mother's legendary brand of strength did not allow for her to linger on that which was not as she desired. Rather, she fought for that which was within her control. To this, she gave everything, trusting in her own capacity and the guidance that fueled her fire. In her last public words, she said, "A society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in." Therein was her truth, the belief and trust that she mattered, that we all matter, and that our actions have the potential to reverberate through time and space. As she saw it, it was in the best interest of our shared destinies to act in selfless dedication to truth and to one another.
Wow. What's happening to the memory of your mother and your relationship with her and her legacy as a result of writing this book?
I mentioned earlier that we didn't have enough time. And I had this paragraph that I had in the book on how we got it backwards. Our relationship got strengthened after her passing. And I didn't know that was really fully possible, right? There's something that feels very finite about death. And it's been quite special to realize that that didn't have to be the full truth. So that has been special to build on a relationship and go so deep into her story. Talking to so many people that knew her, feeling their love for her. So many people just crying, sharing their memories, right? Getting to witness that. 4 of the people I've interviewed have passed on since I interviewed them. So really realizing that these stories have to be captured, it just doesn't happen on its own. There's something about that that's been really important for me to note. We have to be active I had to be active in seeking out her story because I only know a piece of it, right? As her daughter, one lens, my sister had another, my brothers, my father, uncles, aunties, nieces. So really collating everyone's story and bringing it, as I mentioned, as weaving this coherent story of her life as much as I can, and also reaching out to her beyond life and checking in via intuition. What feels right? Does this feel good? Where does this book want to go? What does this book want to be? What does this story want to do and serve? Right? Because it's one thing to tell a story, but what does it serve? So it's been such a beautiful journey of building on on that relationship with her, and also allowing her to do that which she, to my sharing earlier, she was afraid that she couldn't do, which is finish her work. And in many ways, is understanding that that work is never finished. And through this story, it can live on, right? Because there's something really powerful about what she was doing and the role that she has to play in society, in community, in reminding us of the truth of good people, great nation, and calling for Nigeria and the bigger whole to step into the potential of who we are, as she did. So I trust that the story has the potential to allow her work to live on.
Was there any fear?
Absolutely. The road was paved with fear. I luckily have a very good relationship with moving through fear, to seeing it, to sort of going, like, oh, there you are. What's going on now? And the big fear is, when you've not written anything, you're going to write a book about your mom. When I thought with your mom's voice, when that did come, who are you? Why you? The story is stupid, right? It's everything, right? Fear comes and it's all the insecurities, right? But they were so important. And each one I could really just sit with, talk to, open up, try to understand what was the seed of that fear, not being enough, and this will prove it, nobody's going to like this, the judgment, okay, fear of judgment, what's happening? But one thing about me that I learned is that when, in this case, I was committed, so I knew that in spite of it all, I was going to write this book. And what I actually did was I gave myself till, I think it was the age of 60. I was like, okay, by when I'm 60, I'll finish this book. And that was how I was able to allow my fear to kind of, because it's like, you're not disciplined, you finish your school paper the night before, nobody's pushing you, you're never going to get it done. So a lot came up, ability. And that's okay. That's okay. That was ultimately okay, because I got to be with it, allow it to maybe have a little bit of a safety net. It's okay, nobody reads, that's all right, it's written, maybe for the family, So I kept talking and allowing myself to feel a little bit less tense, pressure. And ultimately, I had a beautiful support network. I believe deeply in the proverb of going far by going together. So I had really strong pillars step in to support me. And I knew that each step of the way that this was a divine calling, because I saw that I wasn't alone. And then each time that I had this moment of deep doubt, the right person would come in, say the right thing, provide the right support. People that helped me through this book have been just miraculous in how they showed up. So that allows me to have that deep trust that it's not about me. So I can work with my fears, just knowing that I can't make it about me. It's so much bigger. It is so much bigger than me. So it's more about surrender and allowing. Yes.
So you're clearly not 60, and the book comes out this month. So how old are you?
I am 35. I'll be 36. Yes.
Okay. So your first book at 35. Well done. Congratulations. How did you arrive at the title? It's such a powerful title to choose. I am because we are. That's the Ubuntu. And African mothers fight for the soul of a nation.
Is the village. The village came up with this title. It really is. I want to say moment. It's a village, different voices. I had a mentor read it, and he goes, it's the whole, I am because we are in the book, because Ubuntu is such a very powerful philosophy that I trust in. And I saw encapsulated so much of her life. So he picked it up from the book, and it was, I am because you are. And another person, an editor, was like, yeah, but she's all about community. So it's like, I am because we are. And then my family, it's like, yeah, that works. And an African Mother's Fight for the Soul of a Nation was really, how do you allow people to really understand in one sentence who this woman was, the soul being there, nation, Nigeria was so important. Her fight was very present, very much a part of her fire. Being a mother, being African, there's a strong African woman to her. So all of that are just keywords that describe her and at the same time in a sentence speak to her essence and her how she showed up. So in many ways, just different voices just combining and contributing, and ultimately me sitting with it, writing it, checking in, going, yes, no, yes, and ultimately birthing this title. And I'm so happy that you like
it. You're a storyteller, Chidiogo. You work with voice. You work with women to connect to their intuition. To what extent is the offer of your work connected to your experiences as your mother's daughter?
That's a really beautiful question. I hadn't thought of that before. Writing this book has allowed me to trust even more in the power of intuition. I mentioned that I got the calling to do this work, and I had my mother speak to me various times in a way that is just almost through silence, right? And you just feel this voice fill you up. And each time I could trust a little bit more in what I was feeling and being called to. Each time the next something could reveal itself, and the guidance could be amplified. And this is not the first time I've experienced this in my life. I've experienced it in other key moments. So in many ways, I've allowed myself to step beyond that doubt on like, no, it's not real. That's not true. We don't hear things. We don't feel things, only what my brain and my mind and eyes can see, to really realizing that that gift resides within me and by extension within all of us. So my journey with my own intuition and listening, and that is consciously nurtured by years of practices that allow for me to go deeper in listening. Every morning I check in and with silence. I write. I listen into what the day needs, what I'm feeling. So all of that has allowed me to see how that has become my most cherished gift. And that gives to so many aspects of life and gave so much to this book, allowed for it to be born. So in many ways, that's now the support I give to so many women to reconnect to that part of self that has been silenced by the messages of this is not true, what I feel, but how can I trust what I feel? But I don't know how to know. It's like, no, check in. We know, we have an internal compass. We have guides, we have our ancestors, we have our spirit. Learn the language of connecting to self. And I'm a language person. I mentioned I speak 7. And we trust so much in these languages, in the language even of the phone waves and all of that. But what about the other ones that are like the connections, interconnections of Ubuntu that exist for millennia, right? It's something that I'll really quick on that I love around the eggs of a girl child. How if I'm carrying a girl child right now, her reproductive organs or all her eggs are within me, carrying the next generation. That's the connection that exists in the life and in the way that we show up, and to discredit this because people are gone or they're not in front of you. For me, I'm beginning to really understand that that's not true. There's a connection. There's a language that connects us to everything that ever was and will be. And if you can tune into that, into your compass, intuition, that allows such a discovery. And that's my work. how I support people. And in many ways, that's something that the book allowed me to tap into even more and grow even more in a way that allows me to trust so deeply.
Chidiogo, we're speaking at a point where you're giving birth. You've given birth to a book, and any minute now you're going to give birth to your first child. You've talked about nurturing, you've talked about mothering. Mothering is in the title of the book. You've written about your mother. Mothering seems to be quite present for you as a theme. Am I wrong, or am I off the mark?
In many ways, it's part of the unfolding that is happening. It wasn't planned. I started on this journey before I had met my partner back then. Or had I? Not even sure anymore. The journey started a long time ago. So I couldn't, in many ways, this is the synchronicity that I'm trusting in to know that this is all divine timing, planning, messaging. Because I could have had a baby 2 years ago. It didn't work out for different reasons. And that timing would have really affected a lot of things that I wouldn't have foreseen. And here we are. Here it is. None of this was plans to work at the same month of birthday, the birth in a book, etc. But thus is the way of things. And I trust that, sitting this morning, writing in my morning pages and just feeling this calling to heal some parts of me that were, just still feeling the loss of a mother. From, I mentioned that when I was born, she wasn't around, she was ill. And seeing, there's something about coming up in me. I think it's the hormones and emotions in this moment of birth that I'm noticing some parts of me that are still wanting to be seen and healed, that are linked to my relationship to my own mother and to feelings of just loneliness that happened as a younger child and now as an adult woman with my mom gone and going through this moment myself and really realizing that I wanted to, that I was being called to fully see that was still there and give some love to it in this moment of birthing a child, knowing that what we carry, we pass on, and it's not to judge loneliness, but to acknowledge that it's not something I needed to pass on. And that at the same time, I've never felt more held and less alone in the context of just being so guided. But that little girl in me is still there. And I just got to sit with her this morning and just acknowledge that and acknowledge that my body's feeling ready to birth this child and to let it know that I'm always there. The same way that I've always known that my mother's always been there, even though physically she might not have been. It's something that I know that in my heart, I know that she'd always been there for me.
From the perspective of a leader, which you are, and several organizations have recognized that, and being this child of a phenomenal woman and leader herself, what would you say to your fellow change makers, way makers, trailblazers about how they show up to make a difference in the world and how they show up in and for their families?
I believe deeply that you can't give what you don't have. So a big journey to showing up is to show up for yourself, to show up for your own healing, why not? To show up for your own truth, to go have a space that you can connect deeply to that which is true for you. And that could be the calling, the voice that guides you, the sense, the thing that is just urgent in you that you can't push away, but sometimes we do because we're afraid and we're in a job that has security and we don't want to shake or disrupt too much the stability, which feels so good. And humans, we love stability, and taking that leap of faith is one of the hardest things you can do physically. Try to jump off a cliff, hard. Then, with any other thing in life, there's something about stability. But know that which is calling to you and learn to trust that which is true. And in giving yourself or feeding that part of you, then you can show up, I find, fully. And I believe that the world needs everyone to step into their truth in a way that can allow us to show up in it. Not trying to be anyone else, not trying to live up to any expectations or make any amount of money or get that job that looks great, but feed the truth that wants to be birthed. And that's the best that we can give, is what we have.
There's this perspective, Chidiogo, that if good people like you went into politics, that the world would be a better place. Yet your mother does that. Having successfully fought fake drugs, she presents herself for election at the level of the Senate, presumably from the outside looking in, so that she can continue that fight through lawmaking. She loses. How does your family process that experience that this woman has gone through so much on behalf of the country? There have been threats against her life in her attempts to sit her at the ballot box.
Well, the statement that she loses in itself, one that is not straightforward. And, she did go to court to contest that. Correct. The margin was like 400 people, and there was a rerun. And there's a part of me that fully believes that justice was not served. And
but even in that, the fact that this sort of thing could be, if it were true, perpetrated against a person like your mother, still says something.
Absolutely. I think the core of that question would be, did she regret it? Right? And I think that's the whole point with checking in what's true for you. If something so strong was calling her into the Senate, it was the strongest desire. She wanted to serve the people. And because it didn't work out, and because of whatever, not chosen, failure of the electoral system, I think the truth is that she'll do it all over again. And change will not happen if we all live through the fears that were coming up, that fear of loss, that fear of injustice, that fear of the system is broken, so I'm not going to go in because I'll get dirty. So I think it comes back to, what is your truth? Do you want to serve? Put yourself out there. It might take 10 years, it might take 20, but you might not know the butterfly effect of you showing up on something else bigger than yourself. So when we trust that which calls within us, it's because we need to say yes. And your yes opens up the next chapter. But when we live with fear, that opens up nothing. We stay stuck. So I'm with you. It's unfortunate. We wish the road could be smoother, but we are not driving on smooth roads. And we need that fearlessness that is the core of what you're holding space for is needed, because fear is easier, right? And it doesn't mean that it will be easy. The other path, by extension, that's the definition, but it's needed. And she would say the same thing, because no part of her regretted putting herself out there.
What has it meant to you and your siblings, Chidiogo, that your mother left you such a strong legacy, part of which is a good name, that no one accuses her of stealing, that you're not writing off the proceeds of corruption, that wherever you show up in the world, and you are recognized as Dora's daughter, you're immediately received with this warmth and compassion and gratitude and goodwill. And I ask that question because, the truth, the reality of it is that there are other families which, are paying for the misdeeds of one or two of their members, people who've been sanctioned. Children can't travel because this parent or the other did X, Y, and Z. What has that meant to you when you look around?
In many ways, she left us not just the good name, but, within that is what she taught us, right? So I think that's what I'm deeply grateful for, the lessons from my mother. And to your bigger question, interestingly enough, her father left her a good name. Her maiden name is Edemobi. And her father was famous in Nanka, his village. He was known by all for his good deeds. And she was Paul Young's daughter for a long time, until, she became her own person. And that is what life is about. And this is something she believes so deeply in, the continuity, what you pass on to the next generation. And this is the rotten seeds of corruption that it's very easy to be short-sighted and think of self, because that's what corruption is. It's ultimate selfishness. Let's use corruption as a big word for so many misdeeds. The ultimate selfishness is me. When you make fake drugs, it's just me, money in my pocket. You don't think of the child that could die, the mother that would grieve, the family that would be torn apart, the future that would never be because of that money that you've pocketed. And that's what a name encapsulates. It's what could be, it's a potential. So what we living behind a good name is the greatest gift we can give our family. But in many ways, it's also the greatest gifts we can give the community that we're a part of, because the name is also linked to community, etc. So that being said, pardon the noise, she gave us so much more than a name, and that name is a blessing. And I trust that which we have, we will give. And so it goes, and so it goes. And understanding that is the long-sighted way that we can think of things.
We've been speaking, Chidiogo, during a global pandemic. It's been a time of loss and grief for many of us. You've experienced that yourself. What have you learned from those experiences, and how would you apply those insights to recrafting a fair, inclusive, and sustainable world?
COVID is so humbling for different reasons. There's a part of it where there's the suffering, the loss of lives, the loss of livelihood, the unknown, the insecurities. And there's the part that was really eye-opening, where I don't want to say create an equal playing field, but like an example of healthcare. A lot of the challenges we've had in Nigeria, one of it is that we don't have adequate healthcare. And the leaders, a lot of are rich and powerful, that also have the power to change this, can ignore it because they can be served elsewhere. And this has been the case since time. But no one could ever imagine that we could live with all the thousands of billions of flights, that we could live in a time where everything ground to a halt, where you couldn't leave your country, where you couldn't be accepted in the next. So I think there was an eye-opening that happened as well. We can't always run away. We can't always have options somewhere else. We can ignore everything that is going on that is not working. So I think there was that. And there was the space to realize how we could change things if we really wanted to. Perhaps that was some of the parts of the world was showing us that's not necessarily the case, let's say Nigeria, but we could see the human volonté. If you really want things to move quickly, we saw how change could happen quickly overnight. There's so much that has been experienced, so we can't exhaust it. But what I have seen is that it has inspired in people, myself included, a trust in what happens when we slow down, a trust in what happens when we can care a little bit more about others, not just local community, but bigger. We're watching the world, following things everywhere, and caring in some ways. What happens when we can think outside our boxes? Be it working in the office, at home, how we work, how we relate, how we communicate, rethink family ties and bonds and connections, connecting with family. A lot of people went deeper in that. There's too many, a lot of stories and experiences, but I feel like those capture some. And I trust that it gave us a glimpse of how the story that we're living doesn't have to be the way. That just this bump allowed us, it's like, oh, wait, it could be like this. It could be, okay, this will be. And that did something for the human psyche to really fully understand the meaning of a blind spot and to start to question which other blind spots we're working with. And I think that's a powerful impetus for change, because the status quo was simply not serving the majority.
You talk about the status quo and change. And earlier on, you talked about in trying to find yourself running away, and you mentioned the various countries that you run away to. And to quite a few people who might listen to this, it speaks of privilege. So how do you square that, your ability to run away and speak 7 global languages, with your mission of connection and change making?
It's interesting that, it's so much of that, the experiences I've had, I've noticed that there's been a projection of how expensive it must have been for me to live the lives that I lived. The greatest privilege that I've experienced most certainly has been my mother winning the green card lottery. Because a lot of my journeys, maybe half, not all, because it took me a while to have the American citizenship, were on the American passport, but also half were in the Nigerian passport. So I have a sense of the ease of one and difficulty of another. China, Germany. I remember my German visa, I was trying to get it, and so they couldn't understand why a Nigerian wanted to learn German. So I was denied the first time, and I fought this. I wrote long emails, discrimination, what have you. So, within that sense of privilege, don't dismiss my story by saying it's not attainable. Find the pieces of it that are attainable, right? It's what I worked in all these places. In Germany, I had a job and I supported myself. My mother's, our whole philosophy in our family, and anyone who knows my family knows this, is very much there's no support for excess. Let's just, I don't know how to put it. When we were growing up, we didn't have a lot. So I have that as a part of me. And it was later in life, my mom and our family came into middle class, and then, it went up and up in the social strata. So I have a deep ingrained sense of making my way through life that has allowed for me to stay in the hard work anywhere I've been. In China, I was working for a small company, a consulting company, et cetera, and all these jobs that I worked to find. So this is to say that there's definitely things that set me up. Having a passport that allowed for access, having funds that would come if I needed. But I don't believe that that's been the core of my story. I really don't. And I understand how that can be challenged because you're not in my shoes. So all I can share is don't limit yourself because you feel you cannot, because you don't have. That feels to be often just a way not to fully trust that which is calling to you. And these places were calling to me. And there were places that I got a ticket to because, yeah, it's a tricky one. My story is so unorthodox that I am not asking you to do what I've done. It's actually the opposite. It's do what you need to do. Trust where you need to be, and don't live based on the sense of I can't. Don't start there. Within the I can't, look to what you can. And I don't mean to preach. This is me just sort of sharing my truth of this journey. What can you do? And then start there and keep going and keep going. And that's what I've done. And trusting that people show up to support you, and I don't have to reject that abundance. And that's very much a truth of how I live life. I'm open to receiving. And I trust that things come to support the journey when we need them.
Chidiogo, we've come to the end of our conversation. And since the conversation was premised on your book about your mother, I'd like to ask you to read an excerpt as we close the conversation. Could you please read what you have?
Of course. It was her focus on compassion that allowed her to transform her pain into support for so many others in their time of need, an unspoken conviction that another's healing was her own. I experienced this interconnectedness and transference for myself. Recovering from my loss, I connected even more deeply to the invitation to tell my mother's story. While the world saw Dora Akunyili at the peak of her strength, a warrior with a gap-toothed smile, whose light-skinned oval face was crowned with a colorful head tie that doubled as armor against the incessant attacks against her values, I saw the complexity that was hidden from sight. This is the story of her multiplicity, the story of my mother.
That is beautiful. And so congratulations, Chidiogo, on the book. And please accept our best wishes for the safe delivery of your baby. I'd like to thank you so very much, Chidiogo, for your time today and for your vulnerability in sharing your story and your mother's story with listeners around the world. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Uduak. Thank you for being fearless, allowing for so many others, myself included, to step even more fully into this fearlessness. And I trust that in sharing my mother's story with you in this way, I can reach those who are inspired to pick up the book, but know more or connect to self in a way that can allow for their fearlessness to come to the surface. So thank you. And wish me luck for this baby. By next time we see, or when this is out, the baby will be out in the world, inshallah, God willing. So I'm excited about that. And I hope to be fearless in birth.
Be who you need to be. The baby will tell you what you need.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Will tell you what you need. Thank you so very much, Chidiogo.
Thank you. you.